The archival projection shimmered with the static of a thousand-year-old conflict, yet the detail remained sharp enough to count the individual threads on a pair of leather boots. They were placed with a precision that bordered on the religious, tucked neatly beside a sleeping pod in the corner of the bridge. Around them, the deck of the Terran vessel vibrated with the impact of thermal lances, but the boots did not move. They sat there, worn smooth at the heels, a silent witness to the chaos of the Orion War. I found myself staring at them, my own leaf structures curling in a reflexive defensive posture. Would you have stayed to watch the footage, or would you have turned away before the true horror of that day was revealed? Because the archive doesn't just show us what happened, it shows us what we were too blind to see. It is a documented fact of the great Orvani hegemony that we value the preservation of history above all else. My role as an archival custodian is one of high prestige, or at least it was until I was assigned to the human engagement records. I spent the morning preparing a nutrient bath for my roots, hoping for a quiet cycle of cataloging. Instead, I am watching the fall of the 7th Orvani fleet. The footage is framed through the primary sensor array of the Dawnbreaker, Admiral Zhao's flagship. At the time this was recorded, the ship was drifting within 1,200 kilometers of a massive magnetar, a stellar remnant so volatile that its magnetic fields are lethal to unshielded biological life from a distance of 1,000 kilometers. Human shielding, it turns out, is remarkably efficient. Or perhaps they simply don't care about the laws of physics. Admiral Zhao sat in his command chair, cradling a ceramic mug. The steam from his drink was the only thing moving at a normal speed. Everything else on the bridge was a blur of high-velocity data and screaming alarms. 11 Orvani cruisers were currently circling his position like predatory sharks, their primary cannons glowing with the heat of a continuous bombardment. The warmth in the archive room vanished. It didn't fade, it fled, as if the very air had decided it was safer to be cold. My internal sensors flagged a sudden drop in ambient temperature, but my eyes, my primary optical nodes remained locked on the screen. The archive was recording a thermal shift on the human bridge as the enemy fleet synchronized their final strike. The enemy commander transmitted a demand for unconditional surrender. It was a masterpiece of Orvani rhetoric, full of honorable threats and the promise of a quick death. Zhao didn't even look at the communication screen. He took a sip of his coffee. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of defiance or a grin of madness. It was the smile of a man who had found a comfortable spot on a park bench. A notification pinged on the console. Zhao reached out and tapped a single command macro. The screen showed the outgoing message. Signal received. Signal read. No action required. I paused the recording. My primary limb was vibrating at a frequency that suggested I needed to recalibrate my internal stabilizers. I should have been filing a report on the tactical efficacy of magnetar-based defense systems, but I was thinking about my lunch. Specifically, I was wondering if the cafeteria was still serving the sun-filtered minerals I liked. It was a ridiculous thought to have while watching the death of a fleet. My career has been built on the study of military doctrine, yet I was fixated on the fact that Zhao's mug had a small chip in the rim. I restarted the feed. The Orvani fleet opened fire. The space around the magnetar turned into a blinding white void of energy. The white-hot glare of the bombardment lasted for 3 seconds, long enough to bleach the sensors of every recording device in the sector. On the bridge of the Dawnbreaker, the human crew didn't even shield their eyes. Admiral Zhao merely adjusted the heat setting on his chair. As the light faded, the Orvani cruisers were not triumphant. They were gone, or rather, they were being pulled apart, their hulls twisting like damp paper as the magnetar's field, weaponized by the humans' precise positioning, stripped the atoms from their frames. They never account for the drag. Zhao muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's grab plates. He wasn't talking to his crew. He was talking to the mug. I watched the archive with a sense of profound nausea. The early reveal of the magnetar's lethality had only been half the truth. The real horror wasn't the star. It was the fact that Zhao had used a celestial death trap as a tactical anchor because he didn't want to waste ammunition. He had sat there, knowing the exact millimeter where the magnetic flux would ignore his ship but incinerate his enemies. One of the younger Orvani captains, somehow surviving in an escape pod, broadcasted a frantic question. How? How can you stand in the mouth of a god and not tremble? Zhao leaned back. He looked tired, but in the way a person looks tired after a long day of filing paperwork, not a day of mass destruction. Son, he said, his voice echoing through the archive, we trained on things worse than you. We call them Tuesdays. The human line hit me like a physical blow. I am a creature of logic and history, but that sentence, that casual dismissal of a galactic-scale conflict shook the very sap in my veins. Zhao stood up, and for the first time, the archival footage focused on the boots again. He walked over to the corner of the bridge, picked them up, and sat on the edge of the sleeping pod. He didn't look at the burning wreckage of the fleet outside his window. He just began to unlace his shoes. That's enough for today, he told his bridge officer. Wake me if the sun goes out. Otherwise, I'm taking a nap. The hologram flickered and died. I sat in the darkness of the archive room for a long time. My primary data stylus was still clutched in my hand, but I had written nothing. The pair of boots, worn smooth and placed neatly, stayed in my mind. They weren't a symbol of military discipline. They were a symbol of a species that found the end of the world to be a minor inconvenience. I looked at my own roots, safely tucked into their nutrient bath. I realized then that I wouldn't be going to the cafeteria for lunch. I wasn't hungry anymore. I just wanted to make sure the door to the archive was locked.